Imagine a serial killer. Usually they hide in the shadows, they cover their tracks, they fear the law. But what if a serial killer didn't hide? What if, instead, he rode into your town on horseback, wearing expensive clothes, and announced his arrival? What if the town mayor welcomed him, gave him a comfortable bed, and actually paid him a massive fortune to murder your neighbors? In the mid-17th century, this wasn't a nightmare. It was a business model. History is full of witch hunts. We usually blame them on mass panic or religious fanaticism. But in the year 1645, in the east of England, the witch hunt wasn't about religion. It was a highly organized, ruthless, and incredibly profitable business. And it was all masterminded by a 25-year-old failed lawyer named Matthew Hopkins, a man who crowned himself with a fake title, the Witchfinder General. To understand how a nobody became the most feared man in England, you have to look at the year 1645. England was tearing itself apart in a brutal civil war. The king and the parliament were fighting. Law and order had completely collapsed. The assize courts, the official judges, weren't traveling safely through the countryside. Villages were left to govern themselves. Poverty was rampant. Crops were failing, and when things go wrong, people look for a scapegoat. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia. It was the perfect breeding ground for a predator. Enter Matthew Hopkins. He was not a priest. He was not a judge. He was a young, unsuccessful legal clerk with no real prospects. But Hopkins understood one terrifying truth about human nature. People will pay any price to feel safe. He and his partner, John Stern, began traveling from village to village. Hopkins claimed that he possessed a devil's list, a magical book containing the names of all the witches in England. He offered his services to terrified mayors and town councils. For a heavy fee, he would rid their town of evil. Hopkins was legally clever. In England at the time, physical torture like the rack or burning with hot iron was technically illegal without a royal warrant. So Hopkins invented a system of psychological torture that left no marks, but broke the human mind just as effectively. When he targeted a woman, usually elderly, poor, or outcast, he would employ a method called watching and walking. He would lock the victim in a cell. His guards would force her to walk back and forth across the room, continuously, without a single moment of rest. They would keep her awake for 3, 4, even 5 days straight. If you deprive a human brain of sleep for that long, it begins to hallucinate. The victim loses all grasp of reality. Eventually, to just get a few minutes of sleep, these exhausted, broken women would confess to anything. They would confess to flying on brooms, kissing the devil, and cursing their neighbors' cows. But if that didn't work, Hopkins had his ultimate weapon, the swimming test. Hopkins would tie the victim's right thumb to their left big toe, and their left thumb to their right big toe, folding them into an unnatural position. Then he would throw them into a deep pond or river. The logic was twisted and foolproof. Water was considered the pure element of baptism. Therefore, if the woman was a witch who had rejected God, the pure water would reject her, and she would float. If she was innocent, the water would accept her, and she would sink to the bottom and drown. It was a rigged game. Because of the way their limbs were tied and the trapped air in their heavy wool skirts, almost everyone floated for at least a few moments. That was all Hopkins needed. She floats, he would declare, and the town would hang her. This was never about morality. It was about money. Hopkins charged towns an exorbitant fee for his investigations. He billed them for his travel, his food, his guards, and a flat rate per witch discovered. A town could pay him the equivalent of thousands of dollars today, sometimes draining their entire local treasury. He targeted widows who owned land so their property could be confiscated. In just 14 months, this 25-year-old con artist sent over 300 women to the gallows. To put that in perspective, Matthew Hopkins executed more people for witchcraft in 1 year than England had executed in the previous 160 years combined. But the grift couldn't last forever. Eventually, the Civil War cooled down. Real judges returned to the courts. People started to question why the Witchfinder General was charging so much money, and why his methods looked more like torture than justice. A brave clergyman named John Gall published a book exposing Hopkins as a fraud. Sensing the shift in power, Hopkins quietly retired in 1647 with his massive fortune. But karma has a dark sense of humor. He didn't live to enjoy his blood money. He died later that same year, at the age of 27, likely of tuberculosis. Though local legends love to claim that an angry mob eventually subjected him to his own swimming test, and hung him as a witch, the boring truth is that he died comfortably in his bed. Matthew Hopkins proves the most terrifying lesson of history. The most dangerous monsters don't wear horns or hide in the woods. They wear nice suits, carry official-looking papers, and convince you to pay them for your own destruction.